Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Red Loosey podcast. My name is Lucy, and today I'm here with Mark Greenwood. Mark is an author with a passion for Australian history. He has won the West Australian Premier's Award for Children's Books, been shortlisted for the CBCA Eva Pownall Award, and much more. I hope I pronounced that right.
Pretty close. Very good. Yeah.
So welcome. How are you?
I'm very well, and great to be here in Busselton with you.
Awesome. So to start off, we're going to have a bit of a quick fire round. So would you rather just answer the first thing that comes to mind?
Okay. I'll give it a go.
Smart or casual?
Casual.
Fiction or non-fiction?
Non-fiction.
Reading or writing?
Writing.
Left or right?
Right.
TV shows or movies?
Movies.
Night or day?
Ooh, gee, it's getting tougher, isn't it? Night.
Sunset or sunrise?
Sunset.
Rain or shine?
Shine.
Invisibility or flight?
Invisibility.
Cafe or restaurant?
Restaurant.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Sweet or savoury?
Savoury.
Yes, that is the last one.
Wow.
Good job.
Wow, great question.
So now we're going to move on to a bit of the longer questions.
Okay.
So on your website, you're described as a history hunter. What does that mean? How do you go about hunting history?
I love the idea of bringing history to life for young people, young readers, and that involves collecting information and researching, and I'd rather think of that as a hunt for the truth rather than, revision and rewriting and those sort of words. So collecting information for me turns me into a history hunter, and I just love the idea of that we've got such a vibrant history, and, these days I think that sometimes it's the difference between non-fiction and fiction is a really blurry line. I kind of because of the things that happened in the past, there's no real... Sometimes we have to imagine what happened. We have to actually put a little bit of our own interpretation into it. So, I just love being a hunter, tracking down stories from the past and hopefully finding stories that resonate with young readers. And
So having fun with history.
Yeah, I like to have fun with history. And I think a long time ago, history books were old, they were black and white, they were full of facts and statistics, they were cold. And I think history really needs to come to life. I talk about it when I go to schools, and I talk about the idea that I like to colour in history. And a lot of my books are what we call picture books for older readers. And I still think that visual literacy has a really great place with readers of all ages. I mean, when I pick up history books these days, they're full of documents and photos and maps and all these sort of things, and that's visual as well. So I like the idea of adding visual literacy to stories about history, but before someone can illustrate it, they have to have a story.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think of myself as colouring in history with language, and so I try to make stories that really resonate and that they're fun. I did a series of history mysteries, and they're kind of like I tried to find all the clues. I hunted down all the clues to some of the great mysteries in history, then put them into my books because I'm usually the last curious explorer on a long list of explorers that come before me. So I'm thinking if I can put them into my books, then maybe a new reader will come along and find something and interpret it in a little different way, and maybe they'll solve one of these great mysteries. Yeah, who knows?
You've travelled all over the world to research your stories. How does experiencing the places you're writing help you write? Do you find you can connect to the characters better?
Well, I have a wife who's also an illustrator who loves travelling. We've been a bit curtailed lately, but we do travel a lot, and I find travelling really a great experience. And whether I'm looking for a story while I'm travelling or researching, it just opens your mind, being able to go into different countries and different places and kind of get a sense of how people in a different part of the world exist. But for me, going to places where history happened is a really important part of my writing process, and it's not so much to see or smell or taste or hear something in a setting. It's all to do with feelings to me. So how a place makes you feel, because ultimately, if someone's going to read a story, they want to feel something. They want some sort of emotion from the book that they're reading. It's kind of like, if you watch a movie that makes you cry, you generally remember that movie because it's affected your emotions. So I think that if you can affect the way that they feel, when they close the book, they generally will remember that. So, for instance, like going to Gallipoli was a really somber experience, something I would, encourage everybody to do if they ever get a chance. But it's kind of like there was an overwhelming sense of sadness there as well. And then when I went into the battlefield to research the story of Simpson and his donkey, I felt really proud of the Anzacs. So my idea was to weave in feelings of sadness and pride so that eventually if someone read the book, they'd also feel those same emotions. So to me, that's the beauty of going to these places and travelling, is to capture those feelings that somehow kind of we try to weave into words.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not easy, and sometimes it's it just happens and it's natural. I think we've all been to places where we've experienced a feeling, like might be somewhere that even if you don't believe in ghosts, but something that makes your hair on your arm stand up. And so I think that places where stories from history have happened have great presence. And if you're lucky enough, as I've been, to go to some of these places, you kind of get that presence, you sort of absorb it somehow. And we hope that as writers and illustrators, it comes out, because it's really important for illustrators to visit places too, and to interpret, geographical places and bring them to life. So I love travelling, and it's an experience I hope that I get to do more and more as time goes on.
So you can really write in the experiences you feel when you go to those places.
Yeah, I went up to the Bunuba country up with Terry Denton when we did the book on Jundamara, and both of us just being in a place where a story happened with an Indigenous guide, and just being there is just, it's irreplaceable, I think, especially for non-fiction, like what I'm writing about. I'm writing about real people, to walk in their footsteps, to kind of get a sense that you're walking in the place where these people before you walked, and you're walking those same places. And it's just something it's something that I love to do, and I think it's something that really is important for my books and my writing.
And I know you've collaborated on lots of your books with other authors and illustrators, but also written your own pieces. What do you prefer?
Well, I've only ever illustrated one book, and the reason I did it was because I'd sent it out to a lot of publishers and it just wasn't quite right, and I'd collected all this information. I had documents and maps and bits and pieces, and it just wasn't right. And eventually, years ago, I'd sent this particular manuscript to a publisher, and generally, if you get a rejection letter, it's generally one of those short little letters that says no thanks. But I got a 3-page rejection letter from this particular person who I will forever be grateful for. And in the letter, he explained why he loved the story and how he'd like to see it done with all these old photos. And I thought, well, I've got all these old photos. So I started to sort of paste it together myself, and I thought, well, if no one else wants to publish it, I'll do it myself.
Yeah.
It eventually won the Premier's Award. So it was called The Legend of Lassiter's Reef, and it was the only book that I've ever illustrated, and I'd love to do another one. I'm kind of thinking now that there's a story that I would lend itself to that same sort of task, to collect old documents and maps and put it together in an unusual way. But collaborating is a really great thing too, and I have been lucky. I mean, my wife's an illustrator, so I work with her a lot. And we haven't worked on a book since 2017, and we've just done a new book together, and we've got 2 books. So we've got one that's just been finished and another one that will be coming out. So, but Terry Denton I've done 3 books with Terry, and what a great experience that is. I mean, here's a man who loves history.
Yeah.
People associate Terry Denton with exploding cows and crazy stuff in the Treehouse series, but he loves history, and working with him was an absolute pleasure, and I'd love to do more with him. Only trouble is the Treehouse books have got so big now that it takes him a year to do one. So, but Mark Wilson. Recently I did a book with a person in Melbourne who actually I've never met. Never met the guy, Andrew McLean, who did Happiness Box. It was just the way that he wants to work. he wants to work privately, and I respected that. And the book ended up becoming a CBC honour book. So and congratulated him by email. But one day we'll meet.
Yeah.
But so different people like collaborating in a different way. But I really like the way that someone can take a vision that I've had and then interpret it in a kind of really new and beautiful and unusual way. And finally, you get to see how they see the same story, and you go, wow, you've because a collaboration should be absolutely two people making something together, but incorporating both their skills. And when it happens, and it works, it's really great.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for budding writers?
Well, I mean, I always say that the only source of knowledge is reading.
Yeah.
So reading is the way that you need to go. If you're going to be a writer, you should be a reader. And I think that people like me who write non-fiction, we need to also, I know, to really focus sometimes on making sure that I read more for pleasure. Because I generally got books everywhere in my house.
Yeah.
And generally, they're all research books because I'm working on a project and it requires, I'm reading all this sort of material. And lately, the two books that I've just done recently have a lot of different histories on each page. So it's not just one story, it's multiple stories.
Yeah.
So I need to just focus sometimes on reading for pleasure. And my advice for writers would be to read all genres.
Yeah.
If you want to write fiction, read picture books. See how people do it there. For younger readers, if you want to write picture books, read a lot of adult fiction, like read non-fiction, read it all and absorb as much as you can. It's the way you kind of learn about the way stories are crafted. And every author has a different way of going about writing. So learning from a lot of different sources is, and the other thing, I always say to, if I'm talking to people about writing, is that I generally ask everyone, has anyone here play a musical instrument? And you've usually got, if I'm talking to a school group, it's usually, a few people.
Yeah.
And, what do you play? Piano? And they say, I say, when you first played the piano, when you sat behind the piano first, were you any good? And they say, no. And I say, are you any good now? And they say, yes. And I say, how'd you get from being no good to pretty good?
Yeah.
And they go, practice. So my thinking is, why would we not think that writing requires practice as well? Why wouldn't we think that actually the first thing that comes out of a person's, the first draft that they write isn't, they get all, it takes a long time to craft.
Definitely.
Even books with, few words in them take a long time. So my idea is just to read a lot and practice a lot.
Definitely. Writing's like a skill you have to develop and learn.
Yeah, it is. And, I think a lot of people get the wrong impression with a writer that all of a sudden they've met someone who writes and they must be talented in some way. They must have some sort of secret, talent. And of course, there are writers who just beautifully write really well, but there are many of us, myself included, who struggle, and we really work at the craft and work at language, and the books that you see have taken a long time to turn into the words that are on the page. So I think that's a really important thing for a lot of people to really understand that we're not exceptionally talented, we just work hard at it. And luckily we've got an opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Now, I've heard you're a bit of a treasure hunter.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever found anything?
Well, when I years ago I worked on a book called The Legend of Lassiter's Reef, that book that I was talking to you about, and it was about a lost gold reef in the middle of Australia. So part of that research was that also I thought, well, I better go up to Kalgoorlie and find out what it's like to look for gold. So, and that became something that I just loved, being out in the bush and hunting for gold. So I found some gold out in Kalgoorlie, and then my passion turned from sort of gold and the gold fields and all that to stones and rocks, because I got really interested in geology. So I've been hunting the world, looking for gem deposits all around the world. So that took me to Sri Lanka and all sorts of India and all sorts of places. And eventually that ended up becoming a book that's around here somewhere called The Book of Stone.
Yeah.
So, so I found lots of gemstones and things. And then I got interested in how they were cut. And then so I'd meet lapidarists and all sorts of stuff. So I find that really, one of the things perhaps I kind of missed out before, just when you asked about, any advice. One thing is to be curious and follow your curiosity. Because when you're curious about things and you follow your curiosity, it leads you to, collecting and researching and reading things becomes so much fun. It's not like you're doing it because you have to. You're doing it because you love it.
Yeah.
And it's hopefully turn into a book one day. And
Yeah.
when I was out travelling around the world, standing on the edge of active volcanoes, or searching for the biggest meteorite crater in the world, or finding fossil Tyrannosaurus Rex footprints in Arizona, I didn't realise it was for a book. I was just following my curiosity. It was only later on that someone came into my room and saw all my crazy rocks in my writing room and said, "Real, what's this?" And I said, "Well, it's my hobby, it's my passion." And they said, "Oh no, it's a book." And so I was kind of forced down to think, "Oh, really?
Yeah.
It could be a book? Okay, great." So follow your curiosity, read lots, and practice.
Like ask questions.
And ask questions, absolutely. Questions are... I always talk about that. Questions start stories. And if you ask a question, you're going to have to find the answer, aren't you? Especially if you are really curious, and that sometimes leads you down, sometimes an idea, or, where ideas come from, people ask that, and, you say, well, sometimes for me it comes from an old photograph, sometimes it could come from an object. And sometimes I might see an old photograph that intrigues me, but it's not until I start delving into it, collecting history, hunting, that I find out that there's actually another story hiding behind there, and that was really the story I was trying to get to, but it was through a photograph that had nothing to do with the actual story, but it led me into it. So it's a crazy life.
Yeah. Could you tell us a bit about your History Mystery series?
Well, the History Mystery series is a really interesting one. It's just one of those kind of... we have little moments sometimes where you get time, opportunity just comes together, and some people call it luck, I don't know, but a while ago there's a group of West Australian authors and illustrators, and we have a group called Squibby, or Society of Children's Writers and Illustrators, and we get together every year and we have a retreat over at Rottnest, and usually a publisher comes along. And a few years ago, a publisher from Penguin Random House came over. Her name was Jane Godwin. She's also a fabulous author in her own right. And she asked me what I was working on, and I told her I had an idea for a picture book about a plane that was shot down during the Second World War and crash landed on the beach in Broome, and it had $30 million worth of diamonds. And the guy who found all those diamonds was a beachcomber, and they called him Diamond Jack. And she thought it was a great idea. But when she took it to her colleagues at Penguin Random House, they thought it would be a really good idea as a series called History Hunters. So finally, I'd put in a proposal to the publisher for a picture book, and I got back a series of 4 books. So I was quite happy.
Yeah.
And the idea for me, as I was saying before, is usually what happens is I'm a curious explorer, hunting down history, really interested in all stories in history. And occasionally some of them kind of grab me and won't let go. And occasionally there are stories that, I've always been interested in the thylacine, the Tassie tiger, and the sad story of the misunderstood marsupial. And so years ago I'd written a little idea for a picture book, and nothing had ever happened with it. It hadn't been sent to anyone. It was just an idea. And so... well, Diamond Jack became the first one, and the story of the last tiger became one of the other ones, whether the last thylacine in the zoo in Tasmania was actually the last one. So, let's say I start exploring these things, and I'm referencing all the other books that have been made about them, and then I've collected all these clues and bits of information, and I've put them into these little bite-sized books that the next curious explorer can come along and look at. And maybe one day we'll find that elusive thylacine still living in Tasmania. Hope. Or maybe the $30 million worth of diamonds as well. You never know about that. And the other one was the third book. There's 4 books in the series. The third one was Lassiter's Reef. This one here, Lassiter's Gold, and that's just an extension of my incredible love for this amazing Australian legend. And interestingly, I find that there's a life for me beyond books sometimes, and we have a deep responsibility as people who write about history. And when I was writing my first book about Lassiter's Reef, which was a picture book, it was coming to the time just before publication, and I knew that this man Lassiter, who I was writing about, had a son who was alive. And imagine if someone wrote a book about your family and they never contacted your family. It's a little disrespectful,
Definitely, yeah.
So my wife just said, why don't you just contact the son? And his name was Bob Lassiter, and eventually I did, and we've just become such great friends ever since.
That's amazing.
He lives in Sydney. He's now 97 years old, and he's a lovely, lovely man, him and his wife, and I see them every time I go to Sydney. But every time I sit with him like this in his kitchen, he says to me, Mark, you wrote a story about a lost treasure. I lost my father. And so I thought, this is a really big part of the story that had never been told in the story of Lassiter's Gold. So in this book, I decided to honour Bob Lassiter, my dear friend, by having him in the book.
Aww.
So this is a book about his journey from being a young child to an elderly gentleman, and the story that has lived with his family all along. And at the same time, I was able to tackle a slightly different part of the story.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a little bit of life sometimes beyond books, this responsibility we have to the people that we write about.
Yeah.
It's good fun though.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know you've touched on this a little bit, but can you tell us about any future projects we should be looking out for?
Well, one of the projects I'm working on, I've been working on a story for about 10 years now, and it's quite a difficult story to write. I want to do it as a picture book. I'm determined to do it as a picture book. Matt Otley, a good friend of mine, is determined to illustrate it. So that's out there with the publisher at the moment. It's a little bit of a scary story. I haven't done a scary story much. So, and I've actually got a new series of middle grade novels out with. So I've got 3 projects with publishers at the moment, and I've got 2 books coming out. So the first one that will be coming out either late this year or next year is called Our Country, Ancient Wonders, and it's about a group of curious explorers. I keep talking about them, but a bunch of kids who go searching for some of Australia's most ancient wonders. And it's kind of like it's got a very poetic main text and also a fact about the place. And what happened was at the beginning of COVID in 2019, and when it was all sort of starting to happen, and we had a contract for this particular book, and I'd sent it to the publishers. When it came back after the first reading, they'd removed about a fifth of it. And I went, what are you doing? You've taken out the historical bits. And they went, well, we're going to just do ancient wonders. And I went, well, what am I going to do with all the other bits? Yeah. And they said, well, what about if we do a second book? And I went, okay. So the second book is a book called Where History Happens. And it's about all these places, same curious explorers going to all these places around Australia where some of the big events in history happened. And the interesting thing about that book is that a lot of our history these days is needing to be updated because there are 2 sides to many of the places, like for instance, where Captain Cook landed, there are 2 sides to that story. So I've had to, go back and really re-look at history and just talk about it in a new way that is important to talk about these days. Yeah. And I've really, really enjoyed that. So the first book is done. It's been illustrated. It's ready to happen. And the second book is written now. And my wife Rana, who's illustrating it, we're working with her schedule, so she's just finishing a book, and as soon as that one's finished, artwork, she gets this new text, and she'll start with the what they call the roughs and creating all the first drafts as far as her illustrations go.
Yeah.
So very exciting, and hopefully a few, hoping all 3, touch wood, all 3 of the projects that are with publishers now come out, because I feel really they're really important projects to me. I say one of them's been there for 10 years, and the series that I really love doing, the series of the history series. So this one's actually, you hit on it before, because the series title is History Hunters. So there you go, you got it. But yeah, so there's lots going on and lots keeping me busy, and I think that there's so many ideas out there. Sometimes I just got to pull myself back a little bit and go, hold on, hold on. Just concentrate on the ones that we're that I'm working on, and gradually other ones sort of work their way into your life, and the ones that sort of resonate, they take over and they won't let go of you. And like that story that's, as I said, been with me for 10 years now, it just won't go away. It won't go away. It's just there. So I'm really hopeful for that, because I'd love to do a book with Matt. Matt and I have been friends for a long time, and we've never worked together, and perhaps because the project hasn't come along, which would be really good for him to do. And when I spoke to him a couple of years ago about this project, he went, "Oh yeah, this is it," and so fingers crossed.
Well, very excited for those ones.
Yeah.
And that is it. Thank you so much for
thank
joining
you.
me at Dimmicks.
No, thank you to you, and thank you to Dimmicks as well, and good luck with your podcast.
Yes, thank you so much. So goodbye everyone, and keep reading. Woo!